Welcome everyone to today's webinar, How Leaders Become Better Coaches Virtually. Welcome to you for whom it's late at night. Welcome to you for whom it's early in the morning. And for those of you who maybe are in the middle of your afternoon. I'm pleased to be joined today by my long-term friend and colleague and co-author, Kathleen Stinnett. And Kathleen, I don't know where you are exactly, but I know you're a long way away. So say a few words about yourself. I think there's just a little bit of information about you that people would like to know.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. I'm in East Redmond, which is outside of the Seattle area today. And I have had the pleasure to work with you, Jack, for 17 years now. And together we wrote this book and developed a process and a program over a dozen years ago. And things have changed in that time. So we're really excited today to share that with you. And we are joined by Jennifer Lambert is going to be with us, and she's going to be managing chat. We've got over 1,000 attendees today. So please feel free to ask your questions in chat, and she will do her best to be with you, and she'll join us at the end and give you a chance to hear about a special offer we're making. Just a quick preview, Jennifer and I recorded a coaching conversation that we'll give you access to. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So our objectives for today are really to share our perspective on coaching trends as we've seen them emerge, especially over the last 10 years. And we at Zenger Folkman do a lot of research to show what does differentiate great coaching, great leadership. We look for outcomes. So we're going to share some of our kind of standard research about our coaching and what happens when managers get great at their coaching. But we'll also share some interesting new findings we've seen as we've studied this in this pandemic era. And some of that will show the 6 characteristics of great coaches, and Jack wrote a great blog about this recently. And then we're going to really talk about virtual coaching, both how do leaders move into the virtual space, and then how can we train and meet leaders in that space in this new world where many of us are not back in the office yet.
So I was a bit concerned that as you read this title, How Leaders Become Better Coaches Virtually, that you could interpret it kind of 2 ways. You could have said to yourself, is it about how leaders learn to be better coaches using some virtual technology? Or might it be, is the focus of today's webinar about how coaches, as they interact with the person that they are coaching, can do that in a virtual way? So however you interpreted that, the answer is yes, we're going to cover that today. The context that we're having this webinar in is different than any we've ever experienced before. We are living in absolutely unprecedented times. Leaders have a huge amount of stress on them personally. We don't have a chance to interact with people as much as we used to in person. The fate of our businesses is really uncertain. We have personal issues. Our personal lives have been upended in ways that we never had anticipated before. The popular literature is talking about a great deal of mental illness prevailing. And our organizations that we work for, many of them are facing very challenging times. Well-known, long-term, iconic real estate brands have collapsed and closed their doors. A number of industries are clearly under huge pressures, whether it be airlines or cruise ships or hotel chains. The manner of work and the pattern of work has changed in an absolutely dramatic place. So it's really in that context that we address today this topic of coaching, because there's such a tremendous need for it within organizations.
Great. Thanks, Jack, for all of that context. We're going to share research. Some of it is Zenger-Folkman research. Some of it comes from other sources. The International Coach Federation, which is probably the largest professional association for professional coaches, and they're really big here in North America, and they've got kind of wings going out to other countries as well. But in 2020, and this is something that the ICF does almost every year, they are looking at what are the trends in coaching. In 2020, they identified the top 3 obstacles to building a strong coaching culture within an organization, and we see them here. At the top of the list is limited support from senior leaders. And so we know there's a trickle-down effect when organizations say we want to have a coaching culture. Of course, most eyes point to the top and say, are our senior leaders coaching us? Do they believe in coaching? Do they promote this as a developmental activity? And so that tends to be a barrier still. And the inability to measure the impact of coaching and the lack of budget for coaching activities. Now, both of these may speak to the fact that some of these organizations use external coaches. And so clearly the lack of budget for coaching activities would be more pointed toward bringing in external coaches. In years past, what ICF has also identified is that there is a growing trend that most organizations do not want to spend money externally for coaching, but they really want to equip their leaders to have these skills themselves, because coaching can be such a strong developmental activity. Now, within the pandemic time zone, the ICF conducted another study, and they released these findings in July and August, where of the coaches being participating in the study, many of them were external coaches and many of them were internal coaches, leaders who are actually developing their skill set as coaches very actively. 71% of coaches said they needed more technology, especially those who are not returning to work anytime soon. And 85% of those coaches said that their clients have been willing to adapt to new technologies regarding their coaching sessions. And you see then the Burson study. So Burson is a part of Deloitte organization now. They conducted a COVID business resilience study, and you see that only 24% of companies are teaching managers how to support remote teams, and 58% don't feel like they have the right tools or culture to do remote work, and only 41% of them feel that they've adequately trained employees to how to be well in this new environment. So we're at this interesting crossroads of, organizations are trying hard, and my guess is yours are in this bucket of really helping to equip all employees and leaders how to navigate these times. And it does mean that we're going to need to shift how we approach coaching and training of coaches for that matter. So Terry has an interesting poll for us. We've got 2 polls that we're going to ask you to participate in. And when you have all weighed in, we will actually share the poll results. So the first poll is, does your organization train managers how to support remote team members? And we'll keep this open for a moment and give you a chance to weigh in, and we'll see how you are doing compared to everyone else here in this webinar. It's interesting that when Jack and I wrote the book over 10 years ago, we presented at an American Training Development Society meeting, and we asked leaders at that time how many of them were training their leaders how to coach, and less than half were at that time 10 years ago. So I'll be interested to see kind of how we're doing today. So how are we on the poll, Terry, and are we ready to launch that? Great. Okay, so this first question of, does your organization train managers to support remote team members? We've got more of you weighing in with no, but 40% saying yes. So that bodes well. We've got one more poll right here that we're going to invite you to participate in. We'll have a couple more later. Does your organization train managers of people how to have effective coaching conversations? So many of our leaders that we speak with say, I coach my employees all the time. And yet when we really ask them what's happening in those conversations, leaders say, we're talking about status updates and projects and tasks. And so Jack and I would suggest that while that is a critical and essential task that needs to happen between managers and employees, that is not probably what we would consider coaching. And in fact, when we ask employees what they consider to fall in that coaching category, they will say, when my manager is focused on me, my development, giving me feedback, helping me know how to grow. And we've got our results there. So this is fantastic. We have made progress in the last 10 years.
That's right.
Right? That we've got the majority saying, yes, we are training managers how to have effective coaching conversations. Great news.
Okay, given that our topic is coaching, let's take a moment to look at the business case around coaching. So over the years, we've done some research on the impact that coaching has and the relationship of coaching to various business outcomes. We've measured how it impacts employee engagement and commitment. We've measured how it impacts an employee's willingness to kind of go the extra mile. We've measured how it impacts things like them feeling that they're being treated fairly. We've also tried to measure all of these dimensions, not only historically going back, a decade or more, but we've also got some data that we've collected in the last few months that kind of lets us know how are things kind of right now. So let's look at some of these results. The first slide that you're going to be seeing has to do with coaching effectiveness and employee engagement and commitment. So notice that on the vertical axis, we're showing you employee commitment and the percentile of that. On the horizontal axis, we're measuring a coaching effectiveness percentile. So these are measured using a 360-degree feedback instrument. And as you see there, there is a very strong relationship between coaching effectiveness and the degree to which employees feel that they have a high level of commitment and engagement to the organization. Starts at the lower end, the bottom decile at the 26th percentile, and it goes up to the best coaches having people who are committed and engaged at the 72nd percentile. The second slide we want to show to you, again, this is pre-pandemic data. Again, it shows on the vertical axis the degree to which employees feel that they're willing to kind of go the extra mile, put forth extra effort in their job on a daily basis. And that on the horizontal axis is coaching effectiveness as measured again by the 360-degree feedback instrument. And again, notice that at the bottom end, at the lower end, only 15% of employees express a willingness to kind of go that extra mile. And at the higher end, it goes all the way up to 55%. And the final slide that we'll show you has to do with coaching effectiveness and people feeling that they're going to be treated fairly by the organization. At the lower end, you see the least effective coaches, only 15% of their employees feel that they're going to be treated fairly. Whereas at the high end, 59% strongly agree with the statement that they will be treated on a fair basis. Now, we thought you might be interested just to knowing, so what's happened in this last 6 months? Have these data changed at all? So my colleague Joe Folkman did an analysis where he looked at two groups of coaches on whom we had data that had been collected kind of more recently. And what you see here is that on this slide, there is a heightened impact of the importance of coaching in these last few months. The lower scores, the bottom half, people who are below average, that's a lower number than the one you saw earlier. On the other hand, for those who are above average in coaching, that meant that they have a higher impact on employees feeling that they are engaged and committed to the organization. So the differences are not huge, but they are, significant. And so we see that there's a real impact of these last 6 months and that the pandemic. The final slide I want to show you has to do with some specific coaching skills and how they're used. It won't take a long time kind of talking about these, But notice that particularly the very first one, which is the one that shows the most dramatic differences. What you're seeing here is the impact of coaching skills, those who are above average, those who are below average, what effect that seems to have in these days. So the one that's the number one item is the coach truly concerned about developing others? And so for those who are above average, we see that that impacts their colleagues, their subordinates at the 71st percentile. Whereas for those who are below average, it's only at the 29th percentile. So it's obvious that the skills that people use has a major effect on employee morale, employee engagement, employee willingness to go the extra mile. All of these behaviors now really take on added import and meaning. Kathleen?
Yeah, Jack, what I love about these last two slides is it really does showcase I don't have to be in the top 10% in my coaching effectiveness to actually have a pretty significant difference. So just being above average will be helpful. So you might be wondering, so what will it take for me to be above average? And here's another interesting study that we have created in this pandemic era. And so again, our colleague Joe Folkman, who is our resident statistician and psychometrician, he was able to look back through about 4,000 leaders and their 360 data. And he studied the people that scored the absolute highest on their ability to coach and develop others. And through a factor analysis, he said, gosh, the behaviors clustered into these 6 characteristics or qualities. So leading the way, carving out the time to coach and develop. So this probably isn't surprising, and yet it always surprises me when leaders don't do a real carve out to say, employee, you're important to me. I really want to invest in you. I want to have conversations that matter to you. And I was just talking with a client yesterday who said, gosh, coaching in this new environment where we're not face-to-face is going to be very difficult for our managers who are used to just walking down the hall and employees could pop in and get their questions answered. And they got very excited about this possibility because we might actually have to be more intentional about finding time to coach. So I sort of was inspired by the reframe of it might be more intentional for leaders to reach out and carve out time to coach and develop and really call it, this is your window of time. This is your half hour. This is your hour this month that I just want to focus on you. We know that the best coaches recognize and value the person and really meet the person where they are in their complete uniqueness, to leverage whatever that person brings in their most authentic form. We know that coaches who inspire and motivate individuals are more effective at their coaching. And that coaches do this by bringing some enthusiasm and positivity. And we know emotions are contagious. So the more that a coach really expresses that, it goes better for both parties. Providing honest, specific feedback. And I want to link this back to one of the slides Jack showed that looked at when we are better at coaching, people feel like they're being treated more fairly. And isn't that an important topic right now? What we also know is that a leader's ability to provide feedback consistently to every team member also goes to people feeling like they're being treated fairly. When coaches focus on specific actions and paths forward, that's also a quality that really enhances a coach's ability to develop others. Not staying at generalizations, not staying, good luck with that, but when are you going to take that next step and how can I support you, and let's follow up on the other side. And finally, one of the characteristics is that the coach encourages collaboration in a very broad sense, whether it's the team member collaborating with others or working cross-functionally across the organization. But that was an interesting characteristic that we also found in coaching. So we do want to share a little bit about our point of view and perspective around coaching. And I think these have been really consistent for us over time. and they're probably even more important now. So one of the things that we know is that when we coach people and carve out that time, we are sending a message that says, you matter to me. And so sometimes the medium is the message. The fact that I will devote time to you in kind of an uninterrupted way is half of the value that I'm going to provide, that my attention is on you. And we know that a single conversation can literally change somebody's entire trajectory. When we invite people to share memorable coaching experiences, they will hearken back to a single conversation. And then when we ask them, how much time did that manager take with you? It's usually no more than 30 minutes. And sometimes the conversation will only be 15 minutes long. And so what we know is even a single conversation will provide impact. And that employees are very hungry for care and attention right now, especially if they have been impacted and they're not able to return to work in a normal way. I read a recent study that said 94% of people in this time are expressing that they are having personal and professional challenges. 94%. So it's significant, and we need to be able to help each other. We have studied the best practices of coaching across the entire industry. And as you probably are aware, there are many formal coaching certification programs where you can invest a year of time learning how to be a good coach. I did 20 years ago. And yet we've taken all of that and streamlined and codified it into a process and a skill set that we can teach in one day of time. And of course, we'll talk about this later, but we can do this virtually now. And coaching does work in a virtual environment, and we'll share some data with you around that. Even before COVID, only about 32% of coaching actually took place face-to-face within organizations. And so it's not like we're going from face-to-face to virtual overnight. Most of the coaching has been happening virtually even before COVID happened. One of the things that research will show is that when the coach believes in the process they are using, the coaching goes better. And it's sort of process agnostic, if you will. Not one process is better than another, but when you have a process for coaching, you can coach anyone on anything. And so we're going to introduce to you our process for coaching. And this is the FUEL model. And so Jack and I created this methodology about a dozen years ago. And so here's a quick essence of our process, but this is embedded in the work that we do when we work with leaders to train them on how to have these great coaching conversations. So the first step is to frame the conversation, really be clear. What are we trying to accomplish together here? The second step is to understand the current state. And this is not for the coach's benefit. It's not for the coach to gather all the information. It's truly for the coachee to have a different and better and more broad perspective of their own scenario, so that when we start exploring the desired state, something gets unlocked. There's an insight that gets created. And the coachee, the person being coached, will say, here's what I really want to have happen. And we look at how we can get there. And that final step is where we can drill into the specifics and stay out of generalizations, but to say, exactly what are you doing when? And we've created conversation guides and roadmaps to follow so that leaders can really stay within the lines, color within the lines, and have great coaching conversations. So Jack's going to talk a little bit about what makes coaching hard for them.
Yeah, so why is it that managers, leaders, and organizations today don't do more coaching? I suspect that the list is a really long list. One of them I've heard is that, well, my boss doesn't ever coach me, so why should I coach the people around me? But in trying to kind of just think about broadly, in broad terms, what are some of the more dominant reasons? Certainly one of them is that managers are fearful about getting into some conversations because they don't feel like they have all the answers. So one of the barriers we've heard very, very often is that, well, you know, I don't think I've got an answer for all the questions that my subordinate might want to talk to me about. A second one that we hear really frequently, and the reason why leaders don't do more coaching, is time. I'm busy. My plate is really full. I just don't have time to do that. Now, it's interesting, when we've conducted sessions with groups of leaders, we've often asked them, have you ever had a wonderful coaching conversation with one of your boss or some colleague? And virtually everybody can think back in their career to some really meaningful conversation that they've had. And then we've asked them this simple question: how long was that conversation? And, sometimes they were quite long. Sometimes they were really short. On average, they were about 15 minutes. Now think about that, 15 minutes. So meaningful conversation that people remember throughout their entire career, on average, took about 15 minutes. So the question about, does coaching take too long? Maybe that's just an excuse more than a reason. And the third one is that managers are prone, when they think about coaching, they confuse it sometimes with advice giving. That coaches are supposed to be able to give people good advice. And I think here's where we kind of conflate the term coach in an athletic kind of a context, where obviously the coach is giving advice to the players on the field or during their practice sessions. But we would invite you for a moment to kind of think about, from your experience, what is the biggest barrier to coaching? So we've got another poll for you, and we would invite you to weigh in, if you would, in terms of your own perceptions. What is the biggest coaching barrier for you and the people that you see, that you work with? And thanks to all of you who are kind of jumping in and weighing in, and we'll kind of see what the results are in just a moment here.
And Jack, it is interesting, the falling into the giving advice trap. I don't think most managers feel like this is a problem at all, because most managers equate my ability to lead effectively and create value for my team members to share my wisdom and experience and approach. That's advice giving and problem solving, a very critical skill. And yet in a moment, we'll talk about, do we need to give advice and problem solve?
Right.
So I can't wait to see the answer to the poll.
Okay, let's see the results here. Okay, so falling into the giving advice trap was the most frequently chosen barrier for you. Okay, thank you for participating in our little quiz there.
Yeah, that is great. So let's just look at this for a moment. Do managers need to problem solve and advise? And many of you are probably familiar with Dan Pink's great work and his book that he wrote called Drive. And in there, the essence of the book is that most of us are not really motivated by kind of simple monetary rewards. That what is most motivating to us, that has us drive, is that we want mastery, autonomy, and purpose. And so mastery, I want to be able to continually advance my skill set. And so most of us in our work are able to do that almost regardless of what our work is, that we can get continuously better. And that in and of itself is motivational. We want purpose, to know that what we are working for is meaningful, that we are contributing to something that is bigger than ourselves, and that we're clear on what that is. And finally, autonomy. And this is where coaching really comes into play. I want to be able to do my task my way. It's like, tell me kind of what my target is, but let me figure it out myself. And so here's where coaching naturally meets up with this interest and drive, is because our process for coaching is letting the coachee figure out their own solution. And we believe that's usually where the best solution will come, because that's the one that the person will be committed to implement. So Jack and I in the book have this little formula that says the quality of the solution, how good the idea is multiplied by the person's commitment to implement it. And that ultimately gives us the benefit. So the best idea that is half-heartedly implemented will not be as good as a pretty good idea that's fully endorsed and implemented. So we believe that the coach can guide the process for the conversation, but ultimately the person being coached needs to own the ideas and the path forward. And that's not to say managers don't get a point of view. If the quality of idea is really bad and somebody is fully committed to it, hopefully the leader will say, wait, that might have some consequences that you don't necessarily anticipate in this moment.
Okay, so the next thing we want to talk about is what's been changing, what's different today than in the past. You know, one of the advantages of having been in this profession for about 60 years is that it does give you a bit of a perspective. And so I'm going to list a few things that I've observed that have changed over my time in this profession. And then at the end, we're going to ask you to kind of tell us what you think we've missed. Probably the first and most dramatic thing is that coaching is no longer seen as a remedial tool. I recall in the early days of my work in this arena that coaching was usually something that was reserved for managers who were in trouble. I remember a CLO of an organization kind of talking to a group of his colleagues. There are a number of us in this big room, and he said, "Well, you know, we reserve coaching for the bottom 10%. So the only people who are given a coach, bottom 10%." There were some of us who were aghast even 25 years ago, but that's probably been the biggest change, is that we've seen it be something reserved for people who were in trouble, who had interpersonal, not just rough edges, but really thorny, prickly behavior that really got in their way. And it was something that was not done for the best. Now we've seen the complete upheaval, the complete flipping on its head, and now coaching is more often being provided to the best and the most high potential people in the organization. The second observation I guess I would make is we've just seen this enormous surge of interest and use in both internal and external coaching. The research is really compelling that when you add coaching to any development process, that the results you get from that development process are highly elevated. And in a number of studies that have been done, the power of combining coaching with development has just been reinforced over and over again. The third big change I guess I would observe is that there's been this demand for leaders to change their behavior from being more directive, more autocratic, more dictatorial, and moving to a much more coaching kind of behavior. My perception is that one of the great beauties of coaching is that it tends to kind of encapsulate a number of the best behaviors that we've been trying to teach managers over the past decades. It really is kind of, it puts them into operation in a powerful way. I think a fourth element that's really come along, that's really caused a major change in the coaching practice, has been the whole evolution of performance management. For the last 30 or 40 years, there have been very wise people coming at it from all different directions, whether it's Edwards Deming or the other leaders in the early quality movement. They were always very critical of traditional performance appraisal. Peter Drucker was a critic of performance appraisal. And so what we've seen happen in the last 4 or 5 years is a major switch in organizations saying, you know, we're going to abandon our traditional performance appraisal process as the major component of performance management. We want our managers to have frequent conversations with their colleagues of a coaching variety. And so the advent of this major change in performance management has been a driving force for new coaching behavior and skills. And finally, I guess I would say that the pandemic has been a forcing event. People are more remote from each other physically. They don't see each other face to face as often as they did. So we would invite you now for a moment in the chat room to tell us, what do you think we've missed? What else do you see happening that are major changes as it pertains to coaching today? And maybe, Jennifer, you can kind of help us understand what some of those might be. So we welcome you to kind of type into our chat room.
As Jennifer is looking at those, I do want to say that I saw an interesting one that was posted earlier by Anders, and it's been repeated in a couple more comments, of peer-to-peer coaching becoming more of a trend. Anders mentions it, especially in Europe, but that's a very interesting and such a great relationship to foster.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for calling attention to that. Well, thanks a lot. Because of the large number of people that we have on this webinar, we probably won't be able to kind of deal with them all, but we will capture them, and I think we can find a way to kind of get these back out to you, those of you who have been participants with us today. We'd like to have you think about one more poll. Has your organization replaced traditional performance appraisals with more frequent coaching conversations? Would be really interested in seeing what the group of us on today's webinar, how that's been playing out in your organization. So.
And as you're weighing in there, Jennifer, did you see any other themes? And I know it's really fun to see all of the chats streaming in. There's so many.
I was just going to say there was so much streaming in, and it came like a wildfire. A lot had to do with the changes in technology. And a lot of it had to do with the balance between work and personal life situations. And almost kind of, how am I a therapist for my employees versus with their workload is a lot of what has been coming in. And then the other caveat is it's giving leeway to being able to have more regular conversations instead of an annual performance review, because you need to have a closer tether to those that you're working with.
Great, thanks, Jennifer.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so let's see here what the percentage is of people who have replaced traditional performance appraisals. So 65% saying no, and 35%, just a little more than a third, saying yes, we have. That is very interesting. Thank you for sharing that data.
Yeah, I'm almost surprised that we're at 35% because this has been a trend that's only been happening in the last 5 years, it seems. So to have a full third of people saying we're going that route is very sort of inspiring for me. So one of the questions we are often asked is, can virtual coaching really work as well as face-to-face coaching? And the answer is an emphatic yes. And so I got a chance to really research this a little bit. And there have been several studies and published research reports over the last 10 years that have shown that online coaching, whether it is on phone or video or high definition video, or even with an email exchange component, can have the same efficacy as face-to-face coaching. And what was measured of the quality of the coaching and the outcomes, and they were nearly identical if it was just voice-to-voice coaching over the phone or meeting in person face-to-face. So that rings true for me as a practicing coach for 2 decades now. I would say 96% of all the coaching I've done in the last 20 years has been audio only. And then in the last 4 years, adding the video component. So it rings true to me. What we also have seen is in the last 10 years, there has been year after year an annual decline in face-to-face coaching throughout organizations. And so right now, maybe 32%, 33% of coaching prior to COVID was done face-to-face, which says the vast majority was happening either over phone or video. And here's the interesting thing, whether it's phone, video, or coach and coachee walking together, whether they are walking side by side or on a phone walking, they all work. So it's pretty inspiring that we don't have to be limited if we're not able to see each other face to face. Jack, what do you think about that? Does that ring true for you as well?
Absolutely. And I think that there's no question that the advent of video-based technology has given us a tool to improve the quality of that coaching, because so much of what we communicate is not only through our, what we hear, but it's really what we see. And so the body language, the facial expressions, all those subtle cues can be transmitted, particularly with the help of our technology.
Yeah, absolutely. Can I say one other thing here? It is really important to figure this out together. Because I went through this learning experience on embodied coaching, right? It's like how we actually live in our bodies and use our bodies and look at each other's bodies and pay attention to all those visual cues and clues. And one of the practices we did was to say, let me face you head on, or let me turn just a little bit to the side, or not make any eye contact at all. And what was fascinating is people had different preferences. So I think this is something you figure out with the person that you're coaching. So I love that.
Some people don't want eye contact. Okay, yep. So we've tried to give you a very clear answer to the one of the interpretations of today's webinar, which is, yes, we can improve the quality of our coaching when we are doing it virtually. Now we want to talk about, can we teach the skill of coaching in a virtual way? And so I guess the key word here that I'd want to emphasize and focus on is the word skills. I think no one questions that we can teach concepts, ideas, information, content is easily transmitted through the use of virtual technology. The big question has been, can you teach a skill that way? So let's just stand back for a moment and say, what do we know about the way to teach skills? I guess I hearken back to the work of a man, Stanford University professor Albert Bandura, who years ago wrote the seminal text in this whole area about social learning theory. What we know about changing behavior is people need to have a conceptual understanding of, in general, what am I supposed to be doing? And why am I supposed to be doing it? The second thing that they need, and really what they benefit from, is watching someone do it really well. So the opportunity to observe someone else doing it is a very powerful way of learning a skill. But the problem is, that's not sufficient. I don't become a great tennis player by watching Roger Federer play tennis. I can learn some things, I can gain some form, I can gain some tips and techniques, but that doesn't give me the skill. The third element of learning a skill is me practicing, me rehearsing, and doing that to the point that I both have confidence and competence to execute that skill. And the fourth element that we know about changing behavior and learning and acquiring a skill is the opportunity for me to get feedback about how well I'm doing. And particularly if I aspire to get ever better at that skill, I can only do that if I'm getting a regular stream of feedback. Now, if I'm playing tennis, I get a stream of feedback because I see the ball hit the net. I see the ball go out of bounds. I see the ball hit the fence, and I know what I did wrong, and I know that I need to correct it. So how do we build, can we build those four elements of a conceptual understanding, of having a chance to observe someone do it well, a chance to practice, and a chance to get feedback in a virtual way? And the answer is a resounding yes. The new technologies allow us the opportunity to have participants practice with each other, and it allows us to have a very powerful stream of feedback, letting people know how well they're doing. So we hope that you have a confidence about the fact that coaching is a skill and that it can be learned using our new virtual technology.
And Jack, before we turn it over to Jennifer to talk about this, I was smiling when you were mentioning watching and observing someone do this skill well is one way to learn. And Jennifer will talk about this, but I just want to tee this up because Jennifer and I got to partner. And so you'll meet Jennifer in just a moment. Jennifer and I got to partner. We said, you know what, let's give you all, our listeners today on this webinar, a chance to watch real coaching happen real time. So Jennifer and I jumped on to a video call. And so you're going to see us going back and forth on Zoom. And Jennifer was generous enough to actually have me coach her on her real issue. And it does speak to one of those themes that we saw in chat, and Courtney mentioned it and others mentioned it, which is I'm now coaching people on like whole life issues. And so I think you'll see this also come up in this about 28-minute conversation with me and Jennifer. So I want to give you a plug. I can't say that it's excellent modeling, but let's just say it's good enough, and you'll see the fuel model in action. And so Jennifer, I want to turn it over to you. And Jack, it was great to be with you today.
Same here. Thanks.
Oh, thank you both, Jack and Kathleen, for an absolutely thoroughly engaging webinar. And I will kudo and second Kathleen. You're going to get a real live version of what it's like working in this environment we're in. I also wanted to invite you to join us. We're going to have, if you've enjoyed this and you want to experience the modeled program that we've been talking about with the data, on October 26th and 28th, we're going to have our Elevating Feedback Workshop. That's a virtual public offering, and as well our Extraordinary Coach program on November 9th and 10th. So we're going to be sending a special promotional offer that will come to you via email post-webinar. Everybody will get a recording of the webinar as well. And if you in the chat, you should have gotten a link to give us feedback as well as in an email format. We'd love your feedback, and then you can get the sample coaching conversation with Kathleen and myself. Thank you so much for joining us today. If you are interested to develop, energize, or create an atmosphere of continual improvement, give us a call and request to be contacted, and we'll reach out to you as soon as we're able to. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon.